Ladies and gentlemen, for the speaking program tonight, we think you're going to have some unusual ideas presented to you, and most effectively. We welcome a new speaker tonight and one of our old-timers. But we also have really an old-timer on our program to introduce our first speaker, and I know most of you know him, and many of you who don't know him personally, I am sure have read his book, FDR, My Exploited Father-in-Law, which is a very useful compendium of knowledge about a particular period in our country and certain individuals who have played a very conspicuous part in creating the unfortunate mess in which we find ourselves now. And I know that he would be happy to autograph copies whenever you can catch up with him with a copy and a pen in your hand. And we are always delighted to have him here with us. We have a great admiration for all the effort that he has put in to many activities, but more especially to the activity he carries on in Liberty Lobby. Many of us feel that as long as he has a tight control over that situation, we can continue to expect fine things from that organization, and we hope that that control will never be relaxed. Because if there's any situation that needs a man of integrity at the head of it, it is one of our conservative organizations today. Because there has been one occasion at least, and probably several more, when we have seen what were really good organizations taken over by undesirable elements and their effectiveness eventually destroyed, and it has brought casualties elsewhere in the fall of that organization. So we are all looking to Colonel Dahl to keep a steady hand on the helm of Liberty Lobby, and we are delighted that he is there and doing the job he is, and that he's here to do the job he's going to do for us tonight. Colonel Curtis Dahl.
Colonel Bunker, distinguished fellow Americans, it is a great pleasure for me to be here for the third season and to speak a word or two. I do represent the organization which I am proud to be a member, Liberty Lobby in Washington. We are the action group on Capitol Hill. In effect, we are the people's lobby. And so all of you are our friends throughout the country, and we have many. Now, confidentially, I have a very interesting secret to unfold. That having met the distinguished Dr. Lane Mitchell in Atlanta not long ago, I was so impressed with him that I called up my good friend Anna McKinney and said, "Anna, may I have the honor of introducing this fine gentleman?" And she graciously said that I could. So I stand before you with this very enjoyable and very thrilling experience. The gentleman on my left that I will present to you shortly was born in Atlanta, Georgia. He attended the elementary and high school there. He got his BS and graduated from Georgia Institute of Technology. He received his MS from the University of Illinois, and he received his PhD from Penn State University. That's a very fine record. He is now a director of the School of Ceramic Engineering of Georgia Tech and a consultant of the Ceramic Laboratory at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Lane Mitchell is a retired commander in the U.S. Naval Reserve and served with distinction on numerous important military committees. He is the author of an important book, Ceramics, published by the Scholastic Press. He's a fellow of the American Ceramic Society and an honorary member of the Georgia Mineral Society and other important boards. What particularly drew my attention to Dr. Mitchell was when I received and read his excellent article called The World Invisible Government. I recommend that to you. Now I will disclose one little family anecdote about our guest speaker. He doesn't know that I know it, but from a lady who was sitting on the front row there, I was given this confidential information. And it seems that when Dr. Mitchell was a lad in the early grades of the primary school, he was given in his history course there the task of learning the famous speech by Patrick Henry, who, as you know, said, "Give me liberty or give me death." Well, when young Lane returned home, his mother told him and reminded him that he was a direct descendant of Patrick Henry. And so when he went back to school the next day, he said to various members of his class that he was the ancestor of Patrick Henry. Well, that's quite a statement from a chap in the 5th or 6th grade. And the word got around there, and I think he was rather embarrassed, but when he got home, his mother straightened him out, and he was slightly on the wrong side of a very distinguished telescope. But in any event, he is very proud of that background, and I'm sure we can join in that with him. He's a close friend of Governor Maddox of Georgia and one of his aides-de-camps. He's on his staff. Now, this distinguished man, I believe, will present some of the fire of his ancestor, the great Patrick Henry, and I'm sure that all of us will readily detect that that element is in his system and in his heart. So without further ado, with the greatest of pleasure, I am honored, ladies and gentlemen, to present Dr. Lane Mitchell.
Thank you, Colonel Dow. I am most honored to be introduced by so eminent a man. In fact, I'm overwhelmed to be introduced by so eminent a person as the chairman of Liberty Lobby. This never was a thought that I could be introduced in a large audience like this by so distinguished a man. In fact, I'm overwhelmed to be invited to speak to such a distinguished audience of patriots as this one. It is something that I never dreamed of, but I am delighted to be here. You might wonder why I was asked to be here. Well, I have a good friend in Atlanta, a very dear friend who runs a superb bookstore. And this bookstore manager is a lady of many talents, but one of her talents, which she has par excellence, is the talent of promotion. And she, once her legion of friends gave her a testimonial dinner, and I was invited to be the master of ceremonies at that dinner. And I had the privilege of introducing her. And I likened her to the Beamish boy who slew the Jabberwock, because never could the Mimsy Borogoves or the Slithy Toes or the Jabberwock with eyes of flame stop this Beamish boy with vorpal sword in hand. Nothing stops her. And she promoted me to Mrs. McKinney. And so here I am. Oh, Olivia Autry, Calloo, Calais. This lady sold Miss McKinney a bill of goods. And after I had accepted, I learned to my horror that Olivia had likened me to Ed Griffin, to Tom Anderson, and to Merrill Root. My, how my heart did a flip-flop. Never could I speak with the grace and ease of Ed Griffin. Never could I approach the satirical humor of Tom Anderson. And I have none of the poetic ability of Merrill Root. So here I was. What should I do? Well, I had already committed myself And when one commits himself, he's going to do the best that he can to make the best out of a bad situation. So what was I to do? Well, it reminded me of a little jingle that I learned down at Oak Ridge when I was there on a project some years ago. They said the thing couldn't be done, but with a smile he hopped to do it. He tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and he couldn't do it. Well, be that as it may, it is a joy to be here today. And I was just thrilled to death a few minutes ago to hear those wonderful young people from Bob Jones University sing, and to think that they represent the finest of the youth of our country. Oh, I was so proud. And they stood before these 7 flags that are back of me. I had been a bit disturbed on the first day of the meeting that the middle flag was missing, but it has been put back, and 7 is the number in the Bible, the number of perfection. And here these perfect young people stood before you. It was a joy to be here today to talk to patriots of America, people who form a segment of the best informed group of American citizens. And I know this, that they know something of the nature of the ills that beset our beloved country. Now then, there have been on this program a number of speakers, and I had written out some thoughts of mine to bring to this audience, and I have heard the speakers present every thought that I had written out. Really, I don't have to give this speech, because each one of the speakers has said something that was in my talk today. So my talk is really just a summary of what some of the other speakers have said. But really, I had thought them too, so we had parallel thinking. I want to say that I have been thrilled beyond words at the wonderful speakers. I've heard Ed Griffin and Reverend Grant and Ann Winship and Reverend Hammond and Charles Smith and Reed Benson and Cleon Skousen and Dr. McBurney and Herman Densmore and Ezra Taft Benson, these wonderful speakers. And I would have thought that I might have gotten a little tired of hearing speeches all this time, but I've been thrilled to death by every speaker that I've heard, and I've learned a lot. You know, we conservatives hear so many speakers that we become a bit sated with all the things that we hear, and we might say to ourselves that we've already heard that. But I've learned so much from every speaker that has spoken on this program, and it's been a wonderful privilege. Over the program that we have, I looked at it and I found that I had had the privilege in the past of introducing in speeches in Atlanta at least 4 of the speakers that are on our program. I had introduced Ed Griffin, I'd introduced Cleon Skousen, I'd introduced Ann Winship, and I'd introduced Lester Maddox. So that's 4 of the speakers that are on our program I'd had the privilege of introducing. And it is such a joy to me to shake hands with great men like Merrill Root, and great men that I had heard of all my conservative career and had never met before. But I tell you, friends, one of the greatest joys of this whole thing has been the joy of meeting Colonel Bunker and Mrs. McKinney. I put those people on the very top plane. There aren't any grander people in all the world. I don't see how this wonderful, gracious lady can do all the things that she does. And this elegant gentleman, Colonel Bunker, oh, I've been so proud of the way that he has handled rather delicate situations. Oh, that intrigues me more than I can say. I can't imagine that a situation could come up that Colonel Bunker couldn't handle. And so, When people, either ensnaring doubt, and it's usually ensnaring doubt, or in actual perplexity, ask how my wife and I know so much about the problems of the world, I answer that we study the problems continually in a well-guided framework. I always tell them that they too can be just as well informed as we are, and very probably much more perceptive than we, if they would only join in the well-oriented fight to curtail irresponsible government, if they would exert more individual responsibility, and would have an undeviating goal of helping bring about a better world through individual action and example and influence and prayer. They often look at me with disbelief and an expression as if I have brushed them off with meaningless expressions and platitudes. Now, Mrs. McKinney asked me to talk on education, noting my background as a university professor. And so I thought about this a great deal. Well, I've had many facets of my life. I have been an educator for a long, long time, most of my life. But today I had the joy of reminiscing when I was Assistant State Geologist of Georgia. And I had the privilege when I was Assistant State Geologist of Georgia of going down to the bogs around Savannah, Georgia, and digging up mammoths and mastodons and megatheriums and all sorts of creatures of long, long ago. And when these pictures were put on the screen this morning, I could remember when I, too, had the privilege of digging up such creatures. I was something of a liberal long ago, although I was reared in a Christian family and have never doubted my belief in God Almighty and in Jesus Christ, His Son. Nevertheless, I was something of a liberal politically, and I did not know the true interpretation of the ways of the world. I was an evolutionist because I was trained as an evolutionist in school. And I certainly believed when I was Assistant State Geologist that things had evolved the way that I was taught that they were evolved. But I have shed all that in years that have passed, and it is a remarkable thing that in my educational career I have been the head of a department of geology for some 20 years, and here I'm a disbeliever in one of the great premises of geology. My colleagues can hardly believe that this could be so. I have not had the real job of teaching students in geology because my field is ceramic engineering, and my actual classes have been in ceramic engineering, but nevertheless I was the administrative head of this department of geology. I was, as Colonel Dowell told you, a naval officer. I was a reserve naval officer, and I did spend some time out at your institutions here in Boston, Harvard, and MIT, and I have certificates to prove that I attended classes at those two schools. Nevertheless, I went down to Washington after some period here, and I had a great many experiences down there too, and I learned about a lot of things that had happened. After the war was over, I became commanding officer of a Naval Reserve Division, and when I was looking at some papers that came across my desk, I found the notice that there was going to be a meeting in Washington, a national strategy seminar. And not knowing the makeup of this, I put in for orders to this seminar. I didn't know that I was asking to be included along with governors and senators and judges and college presidents and people of great eminence. But nevertheless, I was selected to go to this first National Strategy Seminar at the National War College. And one of my classmates is here in the audience today, Ken Robertson, and I'm so glad to renew my acquaintance with Ken after all these years. We had a wonderful time there. We had some classmates there who haven't turned out so well. I heard one of them mentioned on the program today, a senator from a neighboring state, one Claiborne Pell. He hasn't had the same intense reaction toward the teaching that Ken and I have had. As a matter of fact, looking backwards, we sometimes wonder if we are not throw-offs from the intent of teaching of this first National Strategy Seminar. When I look at the people who taught me, I ought to be a rather liberal conservative, because say, well, Dr. Henry Kissinger was one of my teachers. And we had his book. Oh, I could name lots of people that you would know who were my teachers. One interesting thing that happened to me not long ago, well, it was several years ago, before Mr. Nixon became president. I was in the Washington airport, and I saw one of the teachers of my class at the National War College, Colonel Fritz Kramer. And I had had great admiration for Colonel Kramer because he was a dynamic man, and with him was Dr. Kissinger. And about that time, General Edwin Walker had been mentioned as being a very radical right-winger and should be recalled from Europe. And I was very much incensed about this, and so I grabbed Colonel Kramer by the hand and said, this couldn't be, this was a terrible thing. And so he invited me to sit down with him and Dr. Kissinger, and so for the better part of an hour, I told about the John Birch Society and why this should be the real way that people should think in this country. Oh, and Colonel Kramer, he very violently disagreed with me. Oh, the John Birch Society is against the United Nations. It's against NATO. It's against things that we must be for. Well, I wasn't well enough informed at that time to argue all with Colonel Kramer, but I was interested that Dr. Kissinger hardly opened his mouth. But nevertheless, they did listen, and this interesting little side glance happened as I took my leave from these gentlemen. Colonel Kramer caught me by the arm after he had been disagreeing with me for the better part of an hour, and he says, keep that good right arm going, keep that good right arm going. It made me think that maybe some of these liberals really don't sincerely think in the liberal tenets. I have been an engineer, a geologist, a naval officer, and I've had a great many interests in many different facets of our everyday life. When Ms. McKinney asked me to talk on education, I thought, well, perhaps old Governor Gene Talmadge, the old Red Gallus governor of Georgia, who was a real conservative as we look back upon it, old Governor Talmadge used to call outspoken university professors educated fools. Well, this educated fool probably knows as little about education as anybody, and therefore I ought to be the ideal expert to tell you something about it. Seriously, I find myself very deeply troubled about the goals and the methods and the substance and even the facilities of our modern educational enterprise. What is education? Well, Webster's dictionary says education is the process of training and developing knowledge, skill, mind, character, and so forth, especially by formal schooling, teaching, training, and correlating the knowledge or ability thus developed. Knowledge is defined in the same dictionary as the act, fact, or state of knowing, specifically by acquaintance or familiarity awareness, or understanding. I thought over these definitions and evaluated them in the light of my nearly 40 years of teaching experience. I would agree that schools do develop patterns of thinking in their student products, but I often deny that character and mind are improved by the process. If I can specifically restrict the meanings of the words bliss and wisdom, I subscribe in part to the saying, if ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. I see all about me the subtle injection of unproven theory into the young minds as fact and truth, the establishment of a faulty premise as the basis for a sequential development of a principle. The faulty datum can never give rise to the whole truth. Even a true premise might be faultily dealt with in going to a conclusion. The only basis of a valid education and acquirement of knowledge is truth. Any deviation from the truth has its effects in debasing knowledge and education. Therefore, I define education as an unrelenting, objective search for truth. This is not to suggest that anyone can know the whole truth, nor should anyone always blurt out the truth, the ill-timed truth we might have kept. Who knows how hard it pierced and stung? The words we had not sense to say, who knows how gladly they had rung? But the word truth is greatly abused, and there are many who regard truth as a relative matter, not as an absolute. I am an absolutist myself, believing that there are eternal verities which do not permit of compromise or interpretation. Such a verity is this: without the physical necessities of life, the people perish. I don't believe there can be any argument with that. That is a truth. It cannot be compromised. If you don't have air to breathe, or food to eat, or the environment that will sustain you, you're going to die. Without the physical necessities of life, the people perish. A sequel to this is this: if the necessities of life are controlled by a concentrated power, the people are enslaved to that power. I would put this whole truth in the simple statement, God as the author of liberty. But perhaps some atheists or non-believers might say this is an interpretation. Last night I sat in the lobby of this hotel at a late hour, and I was with a young lady who was waiting for her husband, and a gentleman came and sat down near us, and we got in a conversation. And I asked this man if he were a church man, and he says, "No, I'm an atheist myself." And I said, "Such a pity, because that makes it sure that you're going straight to hell." This shook him up a bit. He seemed to be an amiable young man, a very nice and pleasant fellow. But nevertheless, he said that he had no patriotism toward one nation, that he would just as soon be patriotic to any other nation or to all people, that he was a citizen of the world, and that he believed in humanism. Well, he was in the wrong place, wasn't he? On the other hand, I believe that man does establish many premises which come to be accepted as truth when they are only opinions or interpretations or misinterpretations. For instance, the French motto, liberty, equality, fraternity, is asserted as a noble truth, whereas the doctrine of equality of all is a certain denial of truth. is a certain denial of liberty. Some of my scientific intellectual friends who pride themselves on their adherence to objective analysis look aghast at me, a long-time head of a geology instruction at a major institution, when I assert that Darwinian evolution is a theory as yet unproved. No one has seen one species change to another. This morning you heard of the tremendous mathematical odds against one species changing to another. No one has found the missing link. I find, though, that one is blasphemous to science if he questions evolution. One is a crackpot per se, by fact, if you question evolution in a major institution today, except perhaps Bob Jones University and Shelton College and a few of these. One is absolutely an oddball if he questions evolution. The scientists today are trying to make it a fact, accepted as a truth, that all people have the right of a safe, secure, and even luxurious existence regardless of performance. This is the goal of the socialist, and they're trying to persuade the people that they have inherent rights to these things. But I would say that performance comes before rights. I teach a Sunday school class sometimes, and I alternate in this position with a gentleman of great vision and great wisdom. I am intrigued at a philosophical point that he often makes when he says that what man establishes may be fact. He sometimes even calls a lie a fact. But only what God establishes is truth. Last night, Cleon Skousen said the only defense against deception is knowledge. And he said the source of our strength is the Bible. And one might paraphrase that and say the source of truth is the Bible. The subject of this talk is truth or consequences. I have defined education as the unremitting, objective search for truth, rather than the dictionary definition of training for and developing of knowledge. Knowledge was defined by the lexicographers as knowing, awareness, understanding. But I put it to you. Now, can anyone know or perceive or be aware of the truth if he does not perceive absolute truth? He cannot have this understanding or awareness or perception if he does not have absolute truth. I am a dedicated educator and have been so for a number of years. But I'm grieved to say that much of our so-called education today is brainwashing and biased presentation. During World War II, we witnessed the Stalin-Hitler Pact and were taught by the press that our enemies had coalesced and shown themselves to be the same. Then, after the pact was broken, we found ourselves asserting sameness with the people's democracies of Soviet color. Then, with the end of the war, we started again thinking of Soviet communism not as the same as our way of life, until the one-worlders gained their awesome power and began the pressure to make us believe that communism is an acceptable way of life. Yet with all of these switches, truth has not changed, only interpretation and philosophies. A good friend of mine was rummaging through the papers of his grandfather, and he came across a yellowed teaching certificate, a fragile paper of long ago. Two mottos embellish this paper. One, knowledge is power, and on the other side, I will try to do right. I was impressed with the thought that the pairing of these two statements indicated that the certifiers of a century ago regarded knowledge as truth, else how could they enjoin the teacher to do right? If knowledge is power, and all power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, then does it not follow that absolute knowledge is corruptive? Yet it seems to me that the fallacy there is the perversion of the word knowledge. When knowledge is truth, knowledge is incorruptible. But when knowledge is inculcated opinion of man without a strict reference to immutable truth, then knowledge is indeed corruptive. Pope said, "A little knowledge is a dangerous thing, so drink deep of the Pierian spring." He must have had truth in mind. I believe that materialistic man established values, and civilizations and society accept these values, and that's the way it should be. Such an acceptance of established values gives rise to law and order, to morality, to codes of ethics, mores, manners. Formerly, when man's accepted values were flagrantly breached, wars ensued. Today we witness a strange phenomenon, a ridicule of accepted values, met with permissiveness that only enhances the ridicule and rebellion. I was talking with Ms. McKinney last night, and she said that she was starting a little personal campaign to do away with parents calling their children kids, that this was a debasement of the dignity of the household. Don't call your children kids, call them children. And this is ridicule in a way. She stated that this probably arose with the Katzenjammer Kids, a comic strip of some time back, where the children were noisy little brats, the mother was a simpleton, and the father was, or the man who's of the house was a not very firm creature. And she also stated that even in a comic strip that is well known to us today, one by one Al Cap, the little Abner and Daisy May, that this has insidious aspects. I had really never thought about that before, but I have to agree with Miss McKinney that little Abner is something of a simpleton, that certainly Pappy Yoakum is not a very firm man, and Mammy Yoakum isn't the ideal of womanhood, although she has some virtues, and Daisy May is, although a rather beautiful girl, is rather lax in her dress. So this is not the best way to pass along thoughts to our children. I take it that any intelligent person could, if he would, analyze propositions, news, philosophies, tenets, politics, statements, editorials, books, essays, stories, events, or any other communication for flagrant deviations from the truth. Perhaps not so for subtle deviations. We can't always see the subtle deviations, but the extremes we ought to be able to notice. But a vast majority of people today are only too eager to conform, to be brainwashed, to accept a proposition as true without any analysis at all. To have a reasonable evaluation of truth does not require genius. It simply requires a bit of thought, the setting of a premise, and a logical sequence of deductions. It's the old game of 20 questions, where logical elimination of extraneous matter can lead to the solution of amazing questions. I'm sure that many of you have played that game. When I studied in high school the old mathematics, geometry, we had a premise and went in logical steps to a conclusion, QED, which was to be proven. Perhaps that is why Plato had inscribed over his school, "He who knows not geometry may not enter here. Ordinary, even fairly stupid people can arrive at a truth if they try to. Certainly it takes no years of formal so-called education to evaluate much of what goes on in this world. Maybe that's why Winston Smith, the hero of George Orwell's 1984, saw the hope of mankind in the proles. The proles were the uneducated, unsophisticated masses who had not had their knowledge perverted or their thinking corrupted by schooling. Yet the sincere and dedicated would-be purveyors of truth are often blinded and distracted and even negated by the impossibility of communication. My wife took some courses in the teaching of reading to high IQ non-readers at Pennsylvania State University while I was finishing up my doctorate. She had a wonderful teacher who brought out this gem of wisdom. Every reader brings meaning to the printed page, not vice versa. Let me say that over again because I think this is a very profound truth. Every reader brings meaning to the printed page, not vice versa. The printed page doesn't bring meaning to you. You bring meaning to the printed page. About 2 years ago, the Georgia Tech faculty had a conference down at Callaway Gardens in Georgia, and some students were along, and the purpose of this conference was to make smooth relations between the administration and the faculty, and between the faculty and the students, and the administration and the students. I was handed a document which was labeled Administrator's Handbook, which included as its main substance another document called the Rights and Privileges of Students. Now, I have been a rather naive, non-suspicious person nearly all of my life, and I didn't know anything was extremely wrong with this document, although when I looked down at it a little bit more carefully, I was alarmed by the fact that it was endorsed by the American Association of University Professors and some other organizations which I do not approve of. Incidentally, I was a long-time member of the American Association of University Professors until I learned of some of its leftist leanings. This document called as Rights of the Students for the lowering of the number of hours of study and the lowering of requirements for graduation. It called for no restriction against student organizations, no objections to any speaker the students might want to have on the campus. We've had Timothy Leary, we've had a whole passel of liberal speakers, very, very, very few conservative speakers, almost none. No recording of disciplinary action on student transcripts, no interference with the school newspaper, no censorship of the school newspaper, no listing of memberships in student organizations, no holding up of recognition of a student organization by reason of faculty counseling or lack of faculty counseling. So these things were in this document. When I was handed the document, I thought, well, it's pretty bad, but nevertheless, I was just handed it, and sometime this was handed to me so that I might know about it. I didn't dream that it was really going to come up for endorsement by the Georgia Tech faculty. But an announcement was made that there was going to be a request of the faculty to endorse this document and accept it as our own. Unfortunately, this meeting was going to be held at a time when I was out of Atlanta at a professional meeting where I was an officer of the American Ceramic Society. So I couldn't be there. But being known as the most vehement conservative on the Georgia Tech campus, I couldn't let this document go unchallenged, and therefore I wrote a long diatribe against this document and had one of my friends present it to the faculty, and I make sure that everybody got a copy. I had it mimeographed and handed out to every member of the faculty. Well, I was not there, but the faculty got my objection to it, and they tabled the meeting because there was considerable doubt on the part of some of these people in the faculty that had not been well oriented as to conservatism or as to liberalism. They wanted to go along, but nevertheless they didn't want to stand up and be counted as conservatives. But there was a tabling of this document, and one of our underground newspapers in Atlanta, the Great Speckled Bird, wrote up my diatribe against the selection of this document and likened me to Hitler. I was a Nazi, and I was put under a picture of Hitler as a Nazi. And I was told that Drew Pearson, before he passed away, picked this up and came out on his national radio and said there was a nest of Nazis down at the Georgia Tech led by one Lane Mitchell. Well, be that as it may, the document came up a second time, and this time I was to be there, but the meeting was very carefully stacked, and a parliamentarian was selected for the faculty, and some odd parliamentary decisions were made where no objections could be raised to this document, and it was approved, but not overwhelmingly, and I was right proud that I, who started out with only 2 or 3 adherents, probably got a third of the faculty to stand up and be counted against this document. One of the interesting things that you might like to hear about was that I predicted that the establishment of this document would lead to the coming to our campus of such organizations as the Black Panthers. And this last year, we had a meeting on the Georgia Tech campus of the Black Panthers. Governor Maddox was going out of town, but he called me up and asked me to be sure to attend this meeting and to report back to him about the Black Panther meeting. I did, and it was the most horrible, treasonous thing that I have ever witnessed in my life. And I called up the president of Georgia Tech, and I told him what I thought about it. And I had an hour-and-a-half conversation with him the very next day. And he was roundly raked over the coals for allowing this to happen, although I will have to take up for him to the extent of saying that he had been tricked into doing this. But nevertheless, there was an air of permissiveness that allowed this thing to happen. And when he reported it to the faculty, he didn't report every single bad thing that happened. And I was in the faculty meeting, and although I'm an admirer of our president, I think he's a nice man and a very good image for our school, although I have to admit that I don't agree with a great deal of his liberality. Nevertheless, I thought he was a decent man and a sincere man, but I did not like the fact that he had sat still in this Black Panther meeting while pornographic language of the most vicious sort was bandied about from the podium, with his wife sitting beside him. And I got up in this faculty meeting when he had told the faculty about the meeting, but had failed to relate this. And I said, President Hanson, there's one thing that I wish that you had done. And this I think you were derelict in. When that pornographic language was being used from the podium, you should have called the meeting to an immediate halt. This was hard to do because I was telling my boss that in front of a lot of people, and a lot of people who don't agree too much with me. But nevertheless, a great many people saw the point of view, and they came around and told me so later. Now then, I picked up a book not too long ago at one of those reading rooms that sell books. The book was The Journal of David Q. Little by R. Daniel McMichael. And this is a story of the future when the communist one-worlders have sway and individualism is ruthlessly suppressed. A wise old man in a dreary hideout contemplates the situation, and these are his words. I did my weeping a long time ago, and for a long time too. I fought it, this drift to insanity, this flight from reason. Tell them a thought, sound the alarm, and they will respond. But few did, and I could only resign myself to the inevitable. But why, I ask, why didn't they listen? I finally tumbled into it. They did not understand what I was talking about because I was unable to communicate with them. You see, each of us has a language all his own, and this is because each of us has values all his own, of one sort or another, even if one of our values is to have no values. Everything we do or say or think stems from these values. If your values and mine are reasonably well aligned, then we have a fair chance to communicate our respective thoughts with some effectiveness, provided we are of a mind to. But if our systems of values are different, then our interpretations of words and thoughts and deeds are different. Try as we might, communication is impossible under those conditions. He went on to say, variety involves choice. Choice involves will. If a man does not or cannot have the will, the desire, the urge, the drive, the courage to make choices, then that person does not take full advantage of the natural variety available to him as a member of the human race. I go along with that, for I long ago looked for a purpose in life, and I came to a conclusion that the highest destiny available to man is to become godlike. And the purpose of this world, the purpose of man in this world, is to leave the world a better place than you found it. There is a destiny that rules that shapes our ends, rough-hewed as we may. And I have thought that the real destiny of man is to do his best. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And God made the waters, and he made the land. And he separated the land from the waters. And he filled the waters with fishes, and he put plants and animals on the land. And finally he created man in his own image. And he gave to man the charge to develop all of the resources of the earth to his own advantage and to the glory of God. And man has the charge, therefore, to develop himself to the full extent that he can, to develop himself morally and mentally and physically, but above all, spiritually. The wise old man of the Journal of David Q. Little put it this way, speaking of the quality of life which implies doing things well or progressively better, so that in addition to our being able to survive, an enrichment process can take place to give greater value and importance to things of life. This is the miracle of man. He has the ability to effect great changes in the world on a scale that can be duplicated by no other creature, provided that the will and choice exercised strengthen the human race and not weaken it, to upgrade, not to downgrade. In fact, I almost have to renege on my statement that I am an absolutist as regards truth. For I recognize two different planes of truth, material truth and spiritual truth. And spiritual truth overrides material truth. The Holy Bible says, lay up not for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not corrupt, and where thieves do not break through and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Jesus said, "It is the Spirit that gives life. The flesh is of no avail. And the words which I have spoken to you are the Spirit and the life. But some of you do not believe." He also said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no man cometh to the Father but by me." So regardless of a material fact, there are overriding values in the Spirit. In our objective search for truth, we many times run afoul of our subjective nature. We have doubts and despair. I remember my distraught moments when I was a youngster in high school, trying to decide what path I would follow in life. And I wrote a little poem then. "Creator of life, maker of me, what is this thing that I want to be? Wielder of power, holder of might, teacher of knowledge, giver of light, or a sailor on every sea?" I was befuddled about my future. I remember disconsolate doubts and moments when the path seemed almost unattainable, and I was filled with despair. And I wrote another little poem. "I wander in the valley where shadows creep, and my spirit sinks at the incline steep that leads to the place up there where shines the light that banishes care, the light that would kill this giant despair who hovers down here where shadows creep." Emerson said, "The greatest homage one can pay to truth is to use it." This morning, Mr. Dinsmore spoke a Pax Americana, and he told how our nation at the end of World War II had the stance in which it could dictate to the whole world a true American peace. We could have prevailed over the world and established a peace which would have been just and honest and would have left all nations free and would have not had all of the discord that we've had. But we surrendered our right to dictate this peace until we have allowed other nations and other people to take away that power from us. At times, we mortals recognize our inability to discern the ultimate. If we but had the heavenly vision, we might see things differently and do our deeds in a different manner. We would then perceive the spiritual truth, the greatest of concepts. My favorite monthly magazine has a poetry section edited by one of America's greatest living poets. In a recent issue, he paid tribute to Edgar Allan Poe, a Southern author of rare ability with words and scintillating ideas. And he regarded one of Poe's poems as his best, and this was the poem Israfel. And Israfel was an angel who played upon his heartstrings as a lute. And he sang wildly well, and all the creatures of heaven, the stars and the moon, and the angels and all of the other creatures paused to listen to the glorious singing of this Israfel. But a mortal, looking at the situation, thought that the shadows cast by this luminary were even brighter than the brightest of light that was available to him. And in a pang of jealousy, perhaps, he wondered how things would be if reversed. If I could dwell where Israfel hath dwelt, and he where I, he might not sing so wildly well a mortal melody, while a bolder note than his might swell from my lyre in the sky. Truth or consequences? If we build on truth, we have nothing to fear. But if we start out on false premises, we shall indeed have consequences. When the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. Then and before him shall be gathered all the nations, and he shall divide them as the shepherd separates the goat from the sheep. And the goats and the sheep he shall put upon his right hand, and the goats on his left. And to those on his right hand he shall say, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom which has been prepared for you from the foundations of the earth. For I was an hungered, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. I was naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye came unto me. I was in prison, and ye visited me. And the righteous shall say unto him, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered, and gave thee meat, or thirsty, and gave thee drink? Or a stranger, and took thee in? Or naked, and clothed thee? Or sick, or in prison, and visited thee? And the king shall say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye did it unto the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. And to those on his left hand he shall say, Depart from me, ye cursed, into the everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was an hungered, and ye gave me no meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me not in. Naked, and ye clothed me not. Sick and in prison, and ye visited me not. And they shall say unto him, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered, and gave thee no meat? When saw we thee thirsty, and gave thee no drink? A stranger, and took thee not in. Naked, and clothed thee not. Sick, or in prison, and ministered not unto thee. And the Lord shall say unto them, Inasmuch as ye have done it not unto the least of these, ye have done it not unto me. And these shall depart from him into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into life eternal. Truth or consequences? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Dr. Lane Mitchell, and thank you, Curtis Dahl, for your participation in this program, and you certainly have made us all feel good.